The restaurant was quiet, filled with the soft hum of conversations and the clinking of glasses. It was one of those high-end places where the chandeliers sparkled above and the waiters moved with precision, almost like they were part of a carefully rehearsed dance. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and fresh bread, with a hint of lavender from the candles on the tables. Every corner of the place spoke of elegance and wealth, and yet, there was a calmness that made it inviting rather than intimidating. At a corner table, near the large glass window that gave a view of the bustling city street, sat a man whose presence seemed to command the room without effort. He was impeccably dressed, in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch glinted under the soft lighting, and the small group around him seemed attentive, almost anxious to keep up with his pace. Papers and a tablet were spread across the table, and his fingers tapped the tablet impatiently, as if he were already thinking 10 steps ahead. The man was known for his sharp mind and shrewd business moves. People called him a billionaire, but it was more than just money that made him remarkable. It was his ability to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. He was used to having people around him who nodded, agreed, and rarely challenged his opinions. But tonight, the scene was about to change in a way he could not predict. The waitress approached the table, carrying a tray with a few glasses of sparkling water. She moved quietly, her steps careful, her expression polite but not overly formal. She was young, with an air of calm intelligence about her. Unlike some of the staff who tried too hard to impress, she simply observed, noticing small details and remembering things that others would easily forget. She knew the menu by heart, she knew which tables preferred what, and she also had a curiosity that went beyond the typical duties of her job. As she placed the glasses on the table, the billionaire's eyes flicked toward her, noticing her presence for the first time. He had seen waitresses before, but something about her made him pause. It wasn't her appearance nor her uniform, but the way she carried herself, quietly confident without arrogance. He was intrigued, though he wouldn't admit it. He waved over one of his assistants and handed her a folder. "I need a quick summary of this clause before we finalize the deal," he said, his tone brisk. The assistant leaned over, reading aloud a few lines from the contract, discussing terms that were complex even for seasoned lawyers. The billionaire nodded, scanning the words, already making calculations in his mind. He was in his element, confident that nothing in the world could outsmart him tonight. The waitress lingered nearby, clearing a few plates and observing quietly. Her eyes caught the words on the papers for a brief moment, not because she was supposed to, but because her mind was naturally curious. She had a habit of noticing patterns, understanding logic, and questioning things that others overlooked. Something about the clause caught her attention, a small detail that seemed out of place. She didn't fully understand every legal term, but her intuition told her that there was more to it than met the eye. The billionaire continued his discussion, unaware of her attention. He gestured to the assistant, pointing out where he thought the risks lay, confident in his analysis. His voice carried a tone of certainty that made everyone at the table follow his lead without question. That was how things usually worked. He had a presence that was hard to ignore, and people often agreed with him just to keep the conversation moving smoothly. But the waitress had a different perspective. She stepped back slightly, giving the group space, yet her mind raced. She remembered reading about similar clauses, the kind that seemed harmless at first glance but had hidden pitfalls that could cause serious problems. It was rare for someone outside the legal profession to notice such a thing, and even rarer for someone to speak up. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was her place to say anything. But something inside her urged her to speak. It wasn't about challenging authority. It was about doing what was right. She took a deep breath and approached the table again, her movements calm but deliberate. The billionaire looked up, slightly annoyed at being interrupted, expecting perhaps a simple question about the order or a minor service issue. Instead, he heard words that stopped him in his tracks. "Excuse me, but this clause is a snare," she said, her voice steady and polite. She didn't sound confrontational. She sounded certain, like she knew exactly what she was talking about. The words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, The room was silent. The assistant froze, unsure how to respond. The billionaire blinked, taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him this way, certainly not someone in a waitress's role. He leaned back slightly, a faint smile forming, more out of surprise than amusement. "A snare?" he repeated, his tone curious but tinged with disbelief. He had heard of legal traps, of course, but never from someone like her. He studied her carefully, trying to gauge whether she truly understood what she was saying or if it was a lucky guess. The waitress nodded, her eyes calm. She explained in simple terms how the clause could create problems, pointing out the hidden conditions and consequences that could affect the deal. She didn't use complicated legal jargon. She explained it in a way that made the danger clear to anyone listening. Her confidence wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was undeniable. There was a clarity in her words that made the billionaire stop and think. The group at the table shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The billionaire's legal team exchanged glances, surprised that someone outside their circle had noticed the flaw. The room, once filled with the steady hum of quiet conversations, now seemed charged with tension and anticipation. Every eye was on the interaction between the billionaire and the waitress. He studied her for a moment longer, realizing that her observation was accurate. His mind, always quick and calculating, now worked differently. He had to process the fact that someone he had underestimated had actually caught a critical detail. There was a mixture of admiration, frustration, and curiosity swirling inside him. It was rare for anyone to surprise him, and rarer still for someone outside the world of business and law to do so. The waitress remained calm, almost serene, as she waited for his response. She didn't try to impress or demand recognition. She simply did what she felt was right. Her poise and intelligence shone through, quietly powerful. The billionaire, used to people nodding without thought, now found himself listening, genuinely considering her words. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me how you know this," he said, his voice calm but curious. There was no condescension, only genuine interest. He had been caught off guard, and now he wanted to understand the mind behind the words that had interrupted his evening and challenged his certainty. The waitress explained that she had always been curious about patterns and logic, that she read and learned in her spare time, studying areas that interested her. She didn't claim expertise, only awareness. Her honesty and humility added weight to her words. The billionaire listened, the faintest trace of a smile returning, though this time it was mixed with respect. For the first time that evening, he felt that he was learning from someone in a position far different from his own. The air around the table shifted. What had started as a routine evening, another deal to be finalized and another set of agreements to be signed, had transformed into something unexpected. The billionaire, the powerful figure used to unquestioned authority, was now faced with insight and intelligence from an unlikely source. The waitress had, in one polite sentence, altered the dynamic entirely. As the night continued, the atmosphere remained charged but no longer tense. The billionaire's team began to reassess the clause, now with her input subtly guiding their analysis. The waitress returned to her duties, quietly observing but no longer just a background presence. She had made her mark, and everyone present sensed it. It was a reminder that brilliance can appear in unexpected places, and that sometimes courage and knowledge come from those we least expect. By the time the evening drew to a close, the billionaire had learned something invaluable. Not about the clause alone, but about people, assumptions, and the humility that comes from recognizing talent regardless of status. The waitress had quietly changed the course of events, and while she returned to her work with no fanfare, the impact of her insight lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. That simple statement, delivered with clarity and confidence, had left an impression that no wealth or power could erase. The next evening, the restaurant felt different, even before the doors opened. It was as if the events of the previous night had quietly echoed through the walls, though most of the staff didn't fully understand why. The same luxurious ambience filled the space, with polished tables and soft lights casting warm glows on the carefully arranged chairs. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but inside, There was a sense that something significant was about to happen. The billionaire arrived again, dressed in his usual sharp suit. He moved with the same confident air, his assistants following closely behind. But this time, his demeanor was slightly more cautious. He had not forgotten the interruption from the previous night, the calm but firm words of the young waitress that had caught him off guard. The clause had been corrected, thanks to her insight, but the experience had left an impression he couldn't shake. He wondered quietly who she really was and how someone in her position could possess such clarity. The waitress, unaware that she was being discussed, went about her morning tasks with her usual focus. She arranged menus, checked the tables, and greeted the few early customers with her calm, polite smile. She had always been good at noticing the smallest details, and nothing escaped her attention. The memory of the previous night lingered in her mind, not with pride, but with a quiet satisfaction that she had done the right thing. She never expected thanks or recognition. Her own sense of fairness and attention to detail guided her actions. As the restaurant filled, the billionaire's team gathered around their usual table. This time, the documents on the table were even more important. A business agreement that had the potential to shape the company's future. The stakes were higher, and the atmosphere was tense. Everyone around him knew the significance of the situation, and the billionaire was more alert than usual. He had learned a lesson the night before. Intelligence could come from the most unexpected sources, and ignoring it could be costly. The waitress approached with a tray, offering drinks to the table. Her movements were smooth, precise, but never intrusive. She was aware of the high-profile guests at the table, but she treated them no differently from anyone else. Her calm presence seemed to balance the tension in the room, and the billionaire noticed this subtle effect immediately. There was a quiet strength in her demeanor, a mix of confidence and humility that drew attention without demanding it. As she placed the glasses down, she caught a glimpse of the documents lying open on the table. Curiosity stirred within her, but she reminded herself to remain professional. She had learned the previous night that stepping forward with knowledge required courage and discretion. She needed to be certain before speaking again, and her mind began to analyze the situation quietly, evaluating whether any part of the agreement might pose unseen challenges. The billionaire's attention was drawn back to the papers, and his assistant explained the key points in detail. Every word, every clause was discussed meticulously. But this time, there was a lingering doubt in the billionaire's mind. The previous night had taught him that he could not assume perfection, even in agreements that seemed secure. His eyes kept drifting toward the waitress, curious whether her presence might once again bring insight he had overlooked. A moment came when one of the clauses seemed straightforward, yet something about it nagged at the billionaire. He had learned to trust his intuition, honed over years of experience. Yet he also remembered the sharp observation of the waitress. The thought that someone outside his team might see what he did not made him pause. He looked up, noticing the calm way she moved around the table, her eyes occasionally flicking to the documents, but without obvious intrusion. Encouraged by a sense of quiet confidence, she approached the table once more. The billionaire sensed that something significant was about to be said, and he leaned back, ready to listen. She studied the page for a moment, and then, in her clear and steady voice, she pointed out a subtle condition that had been missed. The clause, while appearing simple, contained wording that could create a loophole, leaving the company vulnerable if the wrong decision were made. The room fell silent again, the previous night's memory hanging in the air. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly, and his assistants exchanged surprised glances. No one had expected the waitress to notice the nuance, let alone to explain it in terms everyone could understand. Her calm explanation highlighted the risk without creating panic. It was a rare combination: knowledge, clarity, and restraint. The billionaire listened closely, his mind racing through the implications. He realized that this young woman had not only understood the issue but could articulate it in a way that made it undeniable. He felt a mixture of respect and curiosity. He had often encountered brilliant minds, but few possessed the humility and practicality she displayed. It was one thing to identify a problem, but another entirely to communicate it so effectively without ego or drama. He asked a few pointed questions, probing her understanding further. She answered confidently but simply, never overcomplicating her explanations. Her approach made the information accessible to everyone at the table, including the legal experts who were initially skeptical. Slowly, the team began to appreciate the depth of her insight, realizing that her observation could prevent significant issues. The billionaire's demeanor shifted subtly. He was no longer the dominant, unquestioned figure in the room, at least not in this moment. Instead, he was attentive, listening with genuine interest and curiosity. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he was learning something valuable from someone outside his inner circle. There was an unexpected pleasure in this realization, a reminder that wisdom could appear in many forms. The waitress, meanwhile, remained composed. She had no desire for recognition, only the satisfaction of doing what was correct. Her ability to remain calm under pressure and communicate effectively demonstrated not only intelligence but emotional strength. She had learned that influence was not about power or position, but about clarity, courage, and timing. The discussions continued, with the billionaire carefully considering her points. The agreement was modified slightly to address the issues she raised, preventing potential complications in the future. The entire process was conducted smoothly, a testament to her careful observation and precise communication. It was clear to everyone that her contribution was significant, though she accepted it quietly without seeking praise. As the evening progressed, the billionaire found himself reflecting on the unexpected events. He realized that he had underestimated the power of observation, humility, and courage. The waitress had demonstrated that intelligence was not confined to titles, education, or social status. Her actions had subtly altered the outcome of a major decision, showing that insight and initiative could come from any level. By the end of the night, the agreement was finalized with confidence, and the potential risk had been averted. The billionaire thanked his team, but his thoughts lingered on the waitress. He recognized her unique contribution and knew that her influence would remain in his mind long after the papers were signed. She had not only prevented a problem but also reminded him of the importance of listening and observing, even when it meant reconsidering assumptions. The waitress returned to her duties, moving among the tables with the same calm and attentive presence. She had played a crucial role, yet she continued her work quietly, unaffected by the recognition that had quietly settled on the billionaire and his team. Her strength lay not in seeking attention but in acting correctly, guided by knowledge, intuition, and integrity. The night ended with the restaurant returning to its familiar rhythm. The conversations resumed, laughter echoed softly, and the clinking of glasses continued. But for the billionaire and his team, there was a lingering awareness that the evening had been different. One simple act of courage and insight had shifted the dynamic, leaving an impression that would shape future decisions. The waitress had quietly demonstrated that real influence comes from understanding, honesty, and the courage to speak when it matters most. The following week, the restaurant was buzzing with activity more than usual. Word of the billionaire's attention to the waitress had quietly spread among the staff, not as gossip, but as a story of quiet recognition. Many were intrigued, wondering what had led to such an unexpected exchange. The staff carried on with their work, but there was a subtle excitement, as though they were part of something slightly extraordinary. The billionaire returned that evening, his presence as commanding as ever. His team was prepared, papers meticulously organized, and the air of high stakes was tangible. Deals were discussed, decisions were made, and yet, throughout the process, his mind occasionally wandered to the waitress who had so clearly understood the details that he and his team had overlooked. He had always valued intelligence, but this encounter reminded him that insight could emerge from unexpected places. The waitress moved through the dining room with her usual calm efficiency. She noticed details that others overlooked. A customer struggling to reach a menu, a glass needing refilling, a chair slightly out of place. Her attention to detail was habitual, ingrained in her work, but there was also an unspoken awareness of her surroundings. She saw the patterns in human behavior, subtle cues that often revealed more than words could convey. As the billionaire engaged in discussion with his team, a moment arose when a tricky negotiation point came up. The documents on the table had clauses that required careful attention, and even a small oversight could have serious consequences. The team debated options, weighing risks, and the billionaire listened intently. His mind, always sharp, considered every angle, yet he remained open to input, remembering the previous encounters. The waitress observed from a distance, quietly noting the points of discussion. Something about one particular clause caught her attention. It was a condition that appeared routine on the surface but contained wording that could shift the balance in a way not immediately obvious. She had learned from past experiences that careful observation and timing were crucial. Speaking up too soon or without confidence could be dismissed, yet remaining silent might allow a serious mistake to occur. The billionaire noticed her glance and remembered the impact her insight had the previous week. He realized that her perspective might once again be valuable. He subtly encouraged her presence by asking a light question, almost as if testing her knowledge, without calling direct attention to it. The question was simple, but it required careful reasoning. The waitress considered it for a moment, then answered thoughtfully, highlighting a potential consequence the team had not considered. A hush fell over the table. The assistant looked surprised, and the billionaire raised an eyebrow, impressed by her clarity and composure. She explained her reasoning in simple, clear language, making the implications accessible to everyone present. There was no arrogance in her tone, only a quiet certainty that drew respect naturally. The clarity of her observation made it difficult to dismiss, and even seasoned professionals had to acknowledge the validity of her point. The billionaire leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. His expression shifted from curiosity to a mixture of respect and contemplation. He realized that true understanding did not always come from titles or experience alone. The waitress had demonstrated not only intelligence but also patience, emotional control, and the ability to communicate complex ideas effectively. These qualities, rare and valuable, commanded his attention. He asked follow-up questions, exploring her thought process in more depth. She answered each with careful reasoning, providing examples and illustrating potential outcomes. Her insight shed light on aspects the team had not fully appreciated, and the billionaire's approach shifted subtly. He began to incorporate her suggestions into the discussion, adjusting strategies and reconsidering initial assumptions. The room, previously filled with tension, now had an air of focused collaboration. The team, initially skeptical, started to recognize the significance of her contribution. They noted her ability to analyze details, anticipate consequences, and communicate them effectively. The billionaire, too, felt a quiet admiration for her perspective. For someone who did not belong to the world of law or business, her understanding was remarkably precise. It reminded him that talent and insight could appear in unexpected forms, and that humility and openness were essential for recognizing it. The waitress's calm confidence continued to shape the discussion. She was not seeking recognition, but her input naturally influenced decisions. The team adjusted clauses and strategies, preventing potential complications, and the billionaire quietly observed how effective her involvement had become. It was a lesson in trust, observation, and collaboration, delivered without fanfare or drama. As the evening progressed, a sense of mutual respect developed. The billionaire acknowledged her role subtly, making small gestures that indicated appreciation without making a spectacle. She continued her work, attending to other tables and duties, her demeanor composed and professional. Her presence had shifted the dynamic in the room, reminding everyone that influence could be quiet, effective, and unassuming. Throughout the discussion, the billionaire reflected on his own assumptions. He realized that power and status did not guarantee insight, and that dismissing perspectives based on appearance or position could be a costly mistake. The waitress's intervention had not only prevented potential issues, but had also offered a lesson in humility and awareness. He understood that real intelligence often comes with patience, observation, and the courage to speak at the right moment. The team wrapped up the discussions, implementing changes based on her input. The agreement was now stronger, clearer, and less prone to misinterpretation. The billionaire felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with respect for the young woman who had played a crucial role in the process. Her contributions were subtle yet significant, a reminder that wisdom could emerge from unexpected quarters. As the evening drew to a close, the restaurant began to empty, the sounds of conversation and laughter fading. The billionaire lingered at the table, reflecting on the events. He had been challenged in a way that was rare, forced to reconsider assumptions and recognize talent outside his immediate circle. It was an experience that would stay with him, shaping the way he approached future decisions and interactions. The waitress returned to her duties, maintaining her composed and attentive presence. She had quietly influenced the outcome of a major discussion, yet she carried herself with the same humility and focus as always. Her ability to combine intelligence, observation, and emotional control had left an impression not only on the billionaire, but on everyone who witnessed her insight. She had demonstrated that courage, knowledge, and integrity could create meaningful change, even in the most unlikely circumstances. By the time the restaurant was ready to close, the billionaire had made mental notes, recognizing the value of her contribution and considering ways to further engage with such talent. The waitress had left her mark on the evening, not through grand gestures, but through careful observation, clarity of thought, and the courage to speak when it mattered most. The night ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment, a reminder that true influence comes from understanding, presence, and the willingness to act with integrity. The restaurant was quieter than usual that evening, the soft lighting casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The city outside was alive with movement, cars rushing past, people laughing and talking on the streets. Inside, the atmosphere was more subdued, almost reflective. Staff moved gracefully between tables, careful not to disturb the calm energy that seemed to hang in the air. The billionaire arrived, as expected, his presence filling the space without a word. There was a subtle shift in the room when he entered, a recognition of authority that was natural to him, yet tonight something was different. He was no longer the solitary figure commanding the room without challenge. The memory of the waitress's insight lingered, and he found himself curious, almost cautious, about what she might notice this time. He had learned the value of observation and humility, lessons that had quietly reshaped the way he approached interactions. He entered the restaurant with the same confidence, but with a softer edge, aware that true intelligence could emerge in unexpected ways. The waitress moved among the tables, her steps calm and deliberate. She had a sense of rhythm in her work, knowing when to speak, when to pause, when to move. Her mind was always alert, noticing details others overlooked. She saw the tilt of a glass, the faint nervous glance of a customer, the slight misalignment of a chair. But beyond these small observations, she was alert to the flow of conversation at the billionaire's table. She could sense tension, anticipation, and subtle shifts in mood. Her intuition was sharp, refined over years of careful attention. As the billionaire's team reviewed another set of documents, a complicated negotiation point came up. The clause under discussion was tricky, filled with technical language that could easily be misinterpreted. The assistants and legal experts debated, weighing the implications, trying to predict every possible outcome. The billionaire listened carefully, considering every argument, but he couldn't shake the memory of the waitress and the clarity she had brought to their previous encounters. He watched her casually, noting her calm composure and attentive eyes. Something told him that her perspective could be valuable again. He observed the way she moved around the room, noting her focus and presence. He felt a quiet anticipation, an understanding that she might once again offer insight that no one else had considered. There was a trust developing in his mind, an unspoken acknowledgement that intelligence and intuition could come from beyond the expected sources. The waitress, aware of the complex discussion at the table, approached subtly. She didn't want to interrupt or appear presumptuous, yet her instincts told her that her input might prevent a serious oversight. She glanced at the documents, noticing a pattern in the wording that suggested a potential risk. It was a small detail easily overlooked, but the implications could be significant if ignored. She considered carefully how to express it without overstepping, her mind weighing phrasing and timing. Finally, she spoke in her calm, clear voice. Her words were precise, highlighting the subtle condition that could create unexpected outcomes. She explained the potential risk in simple terms, making it understandable to everyone at the table. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and admiration crossing his face. The assistants looked startled, and even the seasoned legal experts had to pause, reconsidering the implications she had raised. The billionaire leaned forward, listening intently. He asked questions, probing her reasoning further, and she answered with clarity, citing examples and illustrating potential consequences. Her insight was not based on authority or credentials, but on careful observation, logical thinking, and a willingness to speak when necessary. There was an authenticity in her approach, a calm authority that made her perspective compelling. The billionaire felt a deep respect, realizing that her contribution was both significant and rare. As the discussion continued, it became clear that her observations could prevent potential complications. The team adjusted their strategy, incorporating her suggestions. The billionaire watched closely, impressed by her ability to influence outcomes without demanding attention or recognition. It was a subtle but powerful demonstration of skill, courage, and intelligence. The atmosphere around the table shifted. What had begun as a standard business discussion became a collaborative effort, guided by insight that came from an unexpected source. The billionaire felt a quiet satisfaction, not just for the resolution of the matter, but for the reminder that true intelligence could appear in places he had previously overlooked. He had been reminded that humility, curiosity, and openness were essential for recognizing talent, and that status alone did not guarantee wisdom. The waitress returned to her duties, her presence still calm and attentive. She had spoken, influenced the discussion, and yet she carried herself with the same quiet grace as before. There was no boastfulness, no expectation of praise, only the satisfaction of having done what was right. Her ability to act with clarity and integrity had left a lasting impression on everyone present, quietly shaping the outcome of a critical discussion. The billionaire reflected on the events as the evening progressed. He realized that he had underestimated the power of observation, humility, and quiet intelligence. The waitress had demonstrated that courage and knowledge could create meaningful change, even when wielded from a position of seeming simplicity. He appreciated her ability to see beyond the obvious, to act decisively when it mattered, and to communicate effectively without arrogance. The team concluded their discussion, implementing adjustments to the documents based on her insights. The agreement was strengthened, the potential risks mitigated. The billionaire felt a deep respect, recognizing that her contribution had altered the course of events in a subtle but meaningful way. It was a reminder that influence and intelligence were not bound by status, title, or position, but by clarity, courage, and understanding. As the restaurant emptied and the last customers departed, the billionaire lingered at the table, reflecting on the experience. The waitress continued her work, quietly attending to her duties, her calm demeanor unchanged. She had made an impact, yet she remained humble, her focus on doing what was right rather than seeking recognition. Her presence had changed the dynamic of the evening, leaving a lesson in humility, observation, and courage. The night ended with a quiet sense of resolution. The billionaire had been reminded of the value of listening, of recognizing talent wherever it might appear, and of the importance of acting with integrity. The waitress had quietly shaped the outcome of a significant discussion, her intelligence and courage leaving a lasting impression. In the end, it was a story of insight, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from doing what is right, regardless of recognition or reward. The restaurant was nearing closing time, and a quiet calm had settled over the room. The soft glow from the chandeliers reflected off the polished tables, giving the space a warm, serene feel. Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, but inside, there was a sense of reflection, of lessons quietly learned. The billionaire remained at his usual corner table, reviewing notes from the meetings of the past days. There was a thoughtful expression on his face, a mixture of satisfaction, respect, and curiosity. He had been reminded, more than once, that insight and talent could appear in places he least expected. The waitress moved about the room, attending to final touches, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, straightening chairs. She did not rush, though the day had been long, and her movements carried a calm precision that seemed effortless. Her mind was alert, as always, observing, noticing, quietly reflecting. She had contributed significantly to the outcome of the negotiations over the past week, but she remained humble, focused on doing her work well rather than seeking recognition. She understood the value of quiet competence and integrity, and it showed in the way she carried herself. As she approached the billionaire's table to clear a few empty glasses, he looked up. This time, there was no formal question, no immediate tension. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, a subtle respect that spoke louder than words. He gestured slightly, inviting her to stand beside the table. She approached cautiously, aware that the billionaire had been impressed by her insight, but unsure of what he intended. He spoke gently, with a tone that carried a mixture of curiosity and sincerity. He asked her about her experiences, how she had learned to notice such details, to understand patterns in contracts and decisions that others might overlook. She explained, modestly, that she had always been observant, that she enjoyed learning and thinking critically. She emphasized that she did not seek to prove herself, but to understand and act when necessary. Her words were simple, yet they conveyed a depth of thought and character that resonated with him. The billionaire listened carefully, genuinely interested. He realized that intelligence was not always measured by credentials or titles, but by insight, courage, and the ability to act thoughtfully. Her perspective had changed the course of important decisions, and he felt a quiet admiration for her ability to remain composed under pressure, to communicate effectively, and to make a meaningful difference without demanding attention. The conversation turned to reflection about the lessons learned over the past week. He shared how her insight had prevented potential complications, strengthened agreements, and influenced decisions in ways he had not anticipated. Yet he was careful to speak without condescension, acknowledging her contributions sincerely. It was a rare moment of genuine recognition, untainted by ego or formality. The waitress responded with humility, emphasizing that her role had always been to observe and act responsibly. She spoke about the importance of listening, of noticing details, and of approaching situations with clarity and patience. Her perspective was thoughtful, human-centered, and grounded in integrity. The billionaire recognized that her mindset reflected not only intelligence but wisdom, a quality that was often overlooked in high-pressure environments dominated by status and authority. As the evening continued, the billionaire began to consider ways to support and encourage talent like hers. He realized that influence and ability could emerge from any level and that fostering such talent was not only beneficial for business but also for the broader perspective it offered. He considered opportunities for mentorship, learning, or even collaboration in ways that could elevate her skills while respecting her role and humility. Meanwhile, the waitress resumed her duties, quietly attending to tables and customers, her focus unwavering. She had gained recognition not through self-promotion, but through the quality of her insight, her calm decisiveness, and her integrity. Her influence had been profound, yet she remained approachable, professional, and grounded. She exemplified the power of knowledge combined with humility, showing that impact could be made without assertion or fanfare. The billionaire reflected on his assumptions about people and intelligence. He realized that he had often judged others based on appearances or roles, overlooking the quiet potential that lay beneath. The experience with the waitress had been transformative, reminding him that wisdom and courage could manifest in anyone willing to observe, learn, and act when it mattered most. It was a humbling lesson, one that would influence the way he approached decisions, negotiations, and interactions in the future. The restaurant gradually emptied, the remaining patrons bidding farewell and leaving with smiles and polite words. The staff tidied the space, prepared for the next day, and exchanged brief comments about the evening. The billionaire lingered, reviewing his notes one last time, his thoughts circling around the lessons of patience, observation, and courage. He felt a sense of gratitude, not only for the practical outcome of the week's decisions but for the reminder of what true insight and influence could look like. As the lights dimmed and the night drew to a close, the waitress completed her final rounds, checking that everything was in order. Her work was steady, consistent, and thoughtful. She had navigated the challenges of the past week with quiet competence, leaving an indelible mark on the people around her. The billionaire watched her for a moment, acknowledging internally the significance of her contributions. She had changed the course of critical decisions and had reminded him of the importance of humility, clarity, and integrity. Finally, he stood and approached her. He spoke a few sincere words, expressing appreciation for her insight, her clarity, and the calm confidence that had guided her actions. She listened politely, accepting the recognition with modesty, emphasizing that her goal had always been to do what was right. The exchange was simple, human, and genuine. A moment of mutual respect that transcended status or titles. The billionaire left the restaurant, a thoughtful expression on his face. He carried with him not only the lessons of successful decisions but the deeper understanding of human potential. The waitress continued her work, her presence steady and professional, her influence subtle yet profound. She had quietly shaped outcomes, demonstrated courage and insight, and reminded everyone around her that intelligence, integrity, and humility could create meaningful change. As the night fully settled, the restaurant was calm and ready for another day. The story of the week, of observation, courage, and quiet influence, lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. It was a testament to the power of knowledge, patience, and moral clarity. The waitress's quiet strength had left a lasting impression, and the billionaire's respect ensured that her contributions would be remembered and valued. In the end, it was a story not of status or wealth, but of human intelligence, insight, and the courage to act rightly when it mattered most.